Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the webinar tonight. Thank you so much for joining me. I love doing these webinars. They're so much fun. I always feel a bit of anxiety before we start, but once I'm in, it's lots of fun, and I'm so grateful for your time and attention that we get to spend this time together, and that you honor me with your presence. And whether it's watching live or whether you're watching on the video, I still feel that that's your presence, and I'm very grateful that you take the time and energy to be part of this. Tonight, as you saw as you were coming in, we are talking about celebrating creation, and that's the whole journey tonight, is to be looking at the season of creation, which is a fairly new addition to the liturgical calendar in churches and denominations across the world. When we think about the development of the liturgical calendar, or the church calendar through the year, this is a very recent addition, and we'll talk about a bit more about that history just now. But this is such an important one, especially for our time. So tonight we're going to be exploring how the season of creation fits into the calendar of the year, how it came to be, why it's important, and how to make it meaningful and transforming if you choose to include a season of creation in your own personal journey or in your community's worship journey. So that's what we're talking about. As I've mentioned, you won't be able to speak, but if you want to communicate with me, I've got the chat open in front of me, and you can just drop me a message. If you have a question at any point through the webinar, drop a question into the chat. I'll pick it up. I'll do my best to answer at the first opportunity. If you have a comment, just drop it into the chat, and I'll pick it up as we go. So feel comfortable to communicate with me there. I'll pick up your questions, I'll read them out loud, and I'll respond to them audibly. That's the quickest way to do it, rather than for me to sit and type while we're doing this. So we've got a lot to cover tonight in this next hour. So let's jump in. And we're going to begin just by talking about the season of creation in context, just putting it in its context. And the first thing we're going to do about putting it in its context is take a look at it in terms of what I call the mystical framework of worship, and also obviously the context of the liturgical calendar. Now, any of you who've been on previous seasonal webinars with me will know about my mystical framework, which is about worship as a mystical encounter, an intimate encounter with the divine, which involves the three elements of intimacy: God's story, our story, and history. I'm not going to go into detail with that tonight. If you haven't picked up on that before, I encourage you to go back onto the Sacred Eyes YouTube channel, and you'll find all the previous webinars there. If you go back, if you want the most thorough treatment of that, go to Advent from last year, and you'll find I think it's about the first 15 minutes or so will give you a really good overview of the mystical framework. Or if you want to, you can sign up and get the free first session of the course that I've just finished running live, the world-changing worship course. And you can sign up. You don't have to pay anything. You get the first session free, and then you are able to get a really good overview of this mystical framework there. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time with that, but the big thing for you to know is that it involves elements where we listen to God's story and elements where we tell our story. And the liturgical calendar is designed with that framework in mind. I'm not sure if those who created it had that framework in mind, but I see that framework at work in the liturgical calendar, which is one of the reasons why I'm quite a devotee of the church calendar, why I use it a lot. So the church calendar begins, as we know, on Advent Sunday, and it begins with what is known as festival time, and that's when we immerse ourselves in God's story for the first half of the year, all the way through from Advent Sunday to Pentecost Sunday. Trinity Sunday is generally the first Sunday of ordinary time, so right through until Pentecost Sunday, we're really immersing ourselves in God's story. And this festival time begins with a shorter period, which is known as the cycle of light, which includes the three seasons of light, if you like, or the three seasons of incarnation, which are the season of Advent, the season of Christmas, and the season of Epiphany. And of course, the key thinking is the light of Christ has come into the world. If you remember that hymn, that's the cycle of light. At the end of Epiphany, we then move into, or what is known as the season after the Epiphany, we move into the cycle of life. And this is where we focus particularly on the movement to and the experience of resurrection. So we begin with the season of Lent, which prepares us then for the season of Holy Week, and then, of course, the season of resurrection, the season of Easter, which ends on Pentecost Sunday. So that's the first half of the year. In the second half of the year, we move into what is known as ordinary time, also sometimes called kingdom time. It's the time where we focus on the reign of God. Now, just to remind you that when we say ordinary, we're not saying ordinary in that it's not special, not that kind of ordinary. It's ordinary in terms of the ordinances of the services, and that relates to their numbering. So we're now in a season where some of them, all the Sundays are referred to as proper whatever, and also often will have an ordinary number as well, and you can use either of those numbering systems. Most people work with the proper numbering system, which is what I do as well. I'm trying to remember now because I'm working in 3 different time frames, but I have an idea that we're on proper 13B this coming Sunday. We've just had proper 12B. So that's what we mean by ordinary time. It's this numbering of the weeks. And the focus in ordinary time is on God's reign and on discipleship. And so I sometimes like to think of it as discipleship time. Not that we don't get discipled in the first half of the year, but that the focus of what we're doing now is on discipleship. And that means that our focus now is on applying Christ's message and mission to our lives and to our world. And so the season of creation falls into this time, which means that it's a season of discipleship. What we're doing in the season of creation is we are working on our discipleship as a community of Christ followers. And in the season of creation, particularly, we're working on how our discipleship relates to our relationship with creation. So with that in mind, let's talk a bit more about the season of creation itself. What is the season of creation? What are we talking about when we speak about a season of creation? Well, to begin with, let me give you a little bit of background for this and talk a bit about how it came into being, because we need to know that if we're really going to understand what we're doing here. So I mentioned that the season of creation is a fairly recent development in the liturgical calendar. In fact, it dates back to about 1989, and it began in the Orthodox churches. Patriarch Demetrios I declared in 1989 that the 1st of September was to be a day of prayer for creation for all Orthodox churches. And Orthodox churches begin their liturgical year on the 1st of September with the celebration of God's creation of the world. So that was an appropriate date for that beginning to happen. By the way, I'm drawing this information with lots of gratitude to seasonofcreation.org. You'll see that URL come up on screen a bit later. They have all of this information. It's a really helpful website, so you might want to check them out after this webinar at some point. But so that's how it began, 1989, with the Orthodox churches. The World Council of Churches then adopted the 1st of September, and they expanded the celebration from the 1st of September into a season that runs to the 4th of October. The 4th of October is the feast of St. Francis. And of course, we all know that St. Francis was deeply immersed in creation spirituality. He referred to sun, moon, animals, creatures as his mother, father, brothers, sisters. The Canticle of St. Francis, of course, celebrates that wonderfully. And so the season of creation is now a season that runs from the 1st of September to the 4th of October. In 2015, Pope Francis made the season of creation an official part of the Catholic calendar, and from there it has spread through the church into other denominations, and it's become this celebration that's about a month, a little more than a month, where we celebrate creation and where it's an intentional time of caring for creation. And many churches encourage their people to get involved in practical ways in caring for creation in this time. Of course, in the Northern Hemisphere, the season begins in autumn, or around the beginning of autumn, where summer's moving into autumn. And so traditionally, harvest festivals have often been held in autumn in many churches. And so some churches bring harvest festivals into the season of creation and use that as part of their celebration, which I think is a wonderful idea. In the Southern Hemisphere, the season begins on what we call in South Africa, I don't know if this is the same in Australia and New Zealand and in South America, but we call the 1st of September Spring Day. If any New Zealanders or Australian people are in the webinar tonight, you might just want to let me know if that works for you as well, if the 1st of September is considered Spring Day for you. But I think it's wonderful to start the season of creation on Spring Day. All the life breaking out in the world around us, and such a wonderful time to really turn our attention to creation. And of course, I guess a little strangely, in the Southern Hemisphere, we often have had harvest festivals, even though it's moving into spring. We often have harvest festivals in this time as well, because there are so many festivals in our autumn time in the early part of the year. So it makes sense to move the harvest festival in later into the year, even though it's not necessarily technically a harvest time. And again, that means that we can celebrate all of that. And of course, now in our world today, there are other kinds of harvests that aren't necessarily related to agriculture. And agriculture also harvests many times through the year, so we can bring all of that into this time. It makes it a really fun season. And that's how it's come about, and that's how it's become what it is today. Just to summarize from the seasonofcreation.org website, they say this: the season of creation, it is a time when we celebrate God as creator and acknowledge creation as the divine continuing act that summons us as collaborators to love and care for the gift of all that is created. So that's some of the background to the season of creation. So why do we need a season of creation? Lovely to do this. It's all, very special and exciting. But why do we actually need this? I believe that it is a really significant need for us. It's something we really do need, both as individuals and in our world today. And this is why, first of all, we are discovering, science is telling us more and more that we are one and interdependent with the cosmos. A healthy spirituality must recognize and embody this truth, in my opinion. We need to see this interdependence. We need to recognize this unity of all things, and that God's mission in Christ is to make all things one and whole together. And so we need the season of creation to remind us of this, so that we break free of this old tradition of human beings being separate and dominant over, but rather recognize that we are part of creation. Secondly, we also know this from scientific studies, that connecting with creation is good for our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. We all know this. When we are feeling stressed, when we're tired, when we're sick, when we get ourselves out into nature, there is a healing that happens when we do that. And so we find that connecting with creation is good for our health. And then, of course, climate change is happening. It's one of the big crises in our world at the moment. It's harming us and it's harming our earth. And so we really need to address climate change. And the truth is that bad spirituality is part of the problem. The spirituality that says, it's all going to be destroyed anyway. The spirituality that says that it's all just for us to exploit. It is a resource for us. Creation is just there as a resource for us, and we can use it and use it up, and then it'll all be destroyed at the end anyway. That bad theology is part of the problem that has brought climate change about. And so if bad theology, bad spirituality is part of the problem, good spirituality is part of the solution. And in a season of creation, we are being called to love the world. We are being called to work for justice, food distribution and justice around food production, justice in terms of water and water distribution, which is becoming an increasingly big crisis in our world, justice in terms of habitation, where we're able to live. And of course, it's always the poor and marginalized who are most hurt by the environmental destruction. We've already seen that happening in our world. And so there's this call to stand in solidarity with the poor and marginalized as they bear the brunt of climate change and its impact on the earth and on us as human beings who inhabit the earth, and of course the other creatures that also are harmed by climate change. We're watching loss of habitat. We're watching changes in patterns, migration patterns, mating patterns of so many species across the world. So there's this real call to love the world and work for justice for the earth, for its inhabitants, and for ourselves, and particularly the poor and marginalized. I say this all the time. Pretty much every chance I get, I say this. How we worship defines how we live. And so a season of creation in which we worship with a focus on creation and justice, that can transform our hearts, our perspectives, and our actions. And it really can, I believe, bring about real and lasting change. And so I don't know if I need to motivate it even more than that, but I really believe that we need a season of creation for these reasons, and there may be many others as well. So with that in mind, I want to share with you a wonderful resource from the seasonofcreation.org website, and you can see there both the cover of their new resource for 2024, and you'll see the URL of the site on your screen now as well, just under my heading there, To Hope and Act with Creation. And this resource is I've been through it. It's really worth using. It isn't a series. It doesn't give you themes and readings and resources for every week of the series, but it does give you some wonderful liturgical resources. It gives you some wonderful resources for justice. It gives you some wonderful creative ideas that you can bring into any of your services. So you can download it free. It's a PDF. Go to the seasonofcreation.org, download it, work your way through it. It really is a really helpful resource. And it begins, I'm going to just give you a quick overview of it. It begins with an exploration of the theme and symbol of their celebration guide for 2024. The theme that they've chosen for this year is to hope and act with creation. To hope and act with creation. I was showing this to my wife just earlier in the evening, and she said, that's amazing. She just loved that. That's how evocative it was for her. And I found it that way as well, to hope and act. For me, that's so important, because when you lose hope, you also lose the capacity to act. And so we need those two things together. And a season of creation is a season of hope as well. So that's its theme. And they make a point that throughout this guide, creation is capitalized. And I want to read to you their reason for doing that. I can't say it better than this. So I'm actually going to quote from this celebration guide. They say, creation is not an object that has been created for human use, but rather a subject that we are called to relate to and collaborate with as fellow creatures. And I've decided I'm going to adopt that now. Wherever I use the word creation in this sense, I'm going to be, when I'm referring to creation as a subject with whom I want to collaborate as a fellow creature, I'm going to use a capital C to speak of it. There's something for me that's prophetic about that. And then they have a symbol that goes with it. And they've chosen for 2024 the symbol of the first fruits of hope, basing the celebration guide on Romans 8, verses 19 to 25. And I hope you'll allow me, I'm sure you know what this reading is, but I hope you'll allow me to read it to you now. And this is what it says. The apostle writes, I believe that the present suffering is nothing compared to the glory that is going to be revealed. to us. The whole creation waits, breathless with anticipation, for the revelation of God's sons and daughters. Creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice. It was the choice of the one who subjected it, but in the hope that the creation itself will be set free from slavery to decay and brought into the glorious freedom of God's children. We know that the whole creation is groaning together and suffering labor pains until now. And it's not only the creation. We ourselves who have the Spirit as the first crop of the harvest also groan inside as we wait to be adopted and for our bodies to be set free. We were saved in hope. If we see what we hope for, that isn't hope. Who hopes for what they already see? But if we hope for what we don't see, we wait for it with patience. So they are using this reading as the center of their celebration guide for 2024. And out of that, they have a number of theological foundations that they are focusing on. And you'll notice that they don't necessarily follow in the order of the reading, but this is the order that they, in the celebration guide, that they lay out their theological foundations. They go into a lot of detail. I'm not going to do that for you. You can always read it in the guide. But just the headings of the theological foundations of this. Creation is groaning in the pains of childbirth, Romans 8:22. That's the first one, is to recognize the suffering of creation. And yet there's this hope of childbirth, this hope of liberation that is coming. And as part of that, the second theological foundation, creation is standing on tiptoe, is the version they use. I love that. Creation is standing on tiptoe, waiting for the children of God to be revealed, Romans 8:19. And so there's this sense in which the children of God need to be revealed, because we are the ones through whom this liberation, this healing, this freedom, this wholeness is going to come. That's the job we've been given as those who were given responsibility as stewards, if you like, of creation in the Genesis accounts, the Genesis stories. And then the third theological foundation is the first fruits of hope, looking at Romans 8:23-25. And the emphasis here is on the power of hope to lead us to transformative action. I often quote, I think it was Thabo Mbeki, one of South Africa's past presidents, who said, "Nothing has ever been accomplished through despondency." And so here in this resource, they're resisting despondency by emphasizing the power of hope to lead us to transformative action. It's a lovely guide. I really have been so impressed with it, and I'm going to make sure every year that I go and take a look at their guides, because they are well worth it. It's a PDF guide, as I mentioned, so you can download it free of charge from the seasonofcreation.org website. It includes invitations from leaders of faith across the denominations, including South African Presbyterian minister, Reverend Dr. Jerry Pillay, who at one stage was one of the leaders in the Presbyterian Church in South Africa. There are explanations of the season of creation, of the theme, of the symbol, the theological foundations in much more detail than I've given you here. There's a season of creation prayer for 2024, which is beautiful. There are ideas for celebrating the season of creation, invitations for advocacy during the season, for getting involved in justice work. And particularly this year, they are supporting the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. And they have links to the website for the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty and recommendations for what we can do in terms of supporting that treaty and reducing our reliance and use of fossil fuels, which of course is one of the big things that is bringing damage to our earth and to our climate. There's a calendar of events for this year's season, and an ecumenical prayer service liturgy, specifically for the 1st of September, but it can be used any time. And it's ecumenical, of course, so bring everybody together in your area, either on a Sunday or at another event, and you could use this liturgy to celebrate the season of creation together. It's a beautiful liturgy, well worth using. And then other ideas that you can incorporate and used to initiate conversation and to start talking about this year's theme together in your community, in small groups, however you might want to do it. Some wonderful ideas for how you can do that. They have ideas for craft making, for creativity, arts, all those kinds of things. It's a really helpful resource and can easily be incorporated into any season of creation theme you might want to follow. Even if you don't specifically use their theme, you could use a different theme, but all of these ideas could easily be incorporated into that theme. So, having spoken about all of this, one of the things that has struck me over the last few years particularly is how creation care really calls us to integrate faith and science. How when we're talking about creation care, we are talking about faith, we're talking about theology, spirituality, our relationship with the earth, our relationship with creation, but we are also talking about science. We are talking about what the sciences are telling us about our universe, about ourselves, about our earth, about the creatures in them, about how we can survive and build a sustainable life together. So we need all of this. We need to understand, as part of the season, climate change as a failure of faith in many ways. The fact that our earth and its species and the poor and marginalized in our world are suffering because of climate change, to a large extent, can be laid at the doorstep of faith communities across the world. Why do I say that? Well, obviously, yes, science has had a role to play. The growth of technology has contributed to climate change, and all of these things contribute to climate change as well. But faith has definitely played its part. And these are some of the failures of faith that I think we need to be aware of, and we maybe need to be addressing in our seasons of creation. And I've kind of hinted at the first one already, that heresy that creation is a dead thing that is there to be exploited purely for human benefit and that ultimately is going to be destroyed. And I've literally heard followers of Christ say that creation care is New Age spirituality, it's of the devil, because ultimately when Jesus returns, it's all going to be destroyed anyway. So why would you want to get involved in that New Age stuff? Well, that in my mind is heretical. It doesn't follow the traditional understanding of the church. It doesn't understand. It doesn't follow what Scripture tells us. It certainly doesn't follow the Jesus who said, "Look at the birds of the air, look at the flowers of the field. If my Father cares for them, how much more will He care for you?" So we need to address that and challenge and stand against that. Maybe I'm being a bit strong calling it a heresy, but in my mind, it really is. I think we need to stand against it. We also need to be aware that it's very often people of faith who are at the forefront of science denialism. And a lot of it comes out of resisting evolutionary science and fighting for the Genesis accounts of creation as scientific truth and the basis for all science that should be taught. And we know that that's bad theology, that there's no actual fight between evolution and the creation accounts in Scripture, because they're telling different stories with different purposes, and their stories are complementary, and together they help us understand and engage with creation more deeply. And so we need to stand against science denialism, and part of that science denialism is denying climate science. There's a strong resistance to scientists who are saying that climate change is real and that it is caused by human activity, and that we need to use science and we need to be intentional about changing how we act in order to address and reverse the damage that's being done to our earth. And so I believe that in the season of creation is the time to address the denialism of science. And then finally, and there may be many others, I'm just going to offer these three. Christianity has been known over centuries for getting into bed with global corporations, with fossil fuel companies, with arms producers, and historically with colonialism. And, there was the whole thing of we're taking Christianity and civilization to the savages in the New World. And we still need to overcome some of those assumptions, some of those prejudices, some of the bigotry around that. And we need to develop a Christianity that is prophetic toward these forces that often are more concerned with profits than they are with caring for creation for our children and grandchildren. And so faith has not done that effectively, and we need to begin to do that more effectively going forward. We're seeing this happening as a movement in faith communities around the world, and it is a prophetic movement that I think we need to be part of. And a season of creation calls us to join in this prophetic movement, where we acknowledge the failures of our faith in the past, and we begin to address them and begin to work towards a faith that cooperates with, that loves, that partners with creation rather than dominating and exploiting it. So we need to bring faith and science together. Our faith needs us to do that. And there are good reasons for that. I could spend a lot of time talking about this, but I'm not going to do that. What I am going to say is without science, faith becomes fantasy. Science deepens our connection with creation, with how creation came into being, which gives us insight into who God is, insight into how God works. It empowers us to care for creation, for one another and ourselves. It gives us practical science gives us practical and meaningful ways to address some of the issues in our world, not just related specifically necessarily even to climate change, but how we can care for creation, for one another and ourselves. And so we need a faith that is connected deeply with what science is telling us about the world. And science leads us ever deeper into the wonder and awe of the cosmos. Some people sometimes think that science is a little bit like peeking behind the curtain at the Wizard of Oz and recognizing that he's not a wizard at all. He's just a little man pulling levers. But that's not the case. I have found in my experience, and many others have testified the same, that the more I allow science to teach me about the mysteries and the wonder and the workings of the universe, the life, the consciousness, the organic nature, the creativity of this cosmos, the more I allow science to teach me that, the more my sense of awe and wonder and praise, the more my capacity for worship is increased. And so we need science to enrich our faith. But conversely, or complementarily maybe, without faith, science becomes sterile. Science is very good at giving us knowledge, but it can often struggle to give us meaning. Science can help us to live, but faith is often what makes living worthwhile. But together, science and faith engage with the big questions of life, because they are both doing that. They're both engaging with the big questions of life. And if I can quote Douglas Adams, life, the universe, and everything. And so when we bring faith and science together, we have a greater capacity to engage with these big questions in more meaningful and helpful ways. And so a season of creation is an ideal time to bring science and faith together. It deepens our understanding of creation. It teaches us how to care well for Mother Earth and for all her children, including ourselves. And it expands our faith and deepens our experience of being alive. Now, can you imagine if that's what a season of creation is doing? What a profound and transforming season it can be. Just those few weeks can make a tremendous impact on the lives of those of us who go through it, our communities as we lead them through it, and then our societies, our countries, our world, it's like dropping a pebble in the pond that it sends ripples out into the world as we are transformed by this experience and understanding of bringing faith and science together and celebrating creation for this season. I really get excited about it. I'm hoping you can pick that up. But for me, it really is a really exciting thought that we can do this. And so with all of that in mind, maybe I'm just going to pause there and just ask if there are any questions or comments. I've thrown a lot at you. So I'm going to give my voice a bit of a breather and just invite you to just, if you have a comment or a question, just drop it in the chat and I'll do my best to respond. So over to you. We did a cleanup project in one of the rivers around Johannesburg, and you get a deep sense of how society has lost the essence of God and creation. I've heard that, Chris. I've experienced that myself in some ways as well. But yeah, it's exciting for me to see. I think it's happening in other parts of the country as well, but certainly here in Johannesburg, I'm just a block away from a little river that runs all the way through the East Rand, this part of kind of Boksburg, Benoni. My wife and I often walk along it. If we walk the full walk, it's about 8 kilometers. And there's a group of people that have grown up around the need to care for this. The bird life is phenomenal. There are fish there are a bunch of lakes in the water. The fish are there. The birds are there, and things need to be cared for. The litter ends up there with rain bringing litter down the stream, and people have done similar cleanup things like that as well. And it is everybody who does it. They always come back with a sense of exactly what you're saying. On the one hand, society's lost the essence of God at creation. But on the other hand, how being part of the cleanup helps people to feel more connected with both creation and the God who created it. So thank you for that comment, Chris. I appreciate it. It really is the experience that we have. And imagine sharing that experience through a season of creation with everyone in your church, and maybe as part of your season of creation, doing cleanup projects like that. Thank you for that. I want to move now to just giving you a window into the work I've been doing in the last couple of months on a resource through Sacred Eyes for a season of creation. I've been wanting to do a season of creation resource for a very long time, and every year I tell myself I'm going to do it, and every year things get too busy and I just don't manage to get it done. And this year I kind of understood why, because I finished it much later than I'd hoped, because things were just really busy. But we're in the last stages of preparing a Season of Creation resource. It's going to launch next week, which gives you about a month to prepare if you're going to run from the 1st of September. Of course, you don't have to run the Season of Creation in those dates. Those are the recommended dates, but you can do a Season of Creation whenever it fits in your community. And so I'm not putting dates into the Sacred Eyes resource because I don't want to limit it to those dates. You can do it whenever it fits you, but I would suggest do it now during ordinary time, during discipleship time. And the resource that I want to share with you is called Better Than We Thought. It's a new Season of Creation liturgical and devotional guide. Better Than We Thought. Now, why would I call it that as a Season of Creation resource? Well, I'm quoting Carl Sagan, the famous scientist from the United States. Of course, he did that TV show that everybody watched called Cosmos way back, I don't know when that was, 70s or 80s, it was a long time ago. Wrote tremendously, was a very influential, I'm assuming he was a physicist, really opened up the mysteries of space to the public, to in popular language that everyone could understand in many ways. And this is the quote that I picked up a few years ago from Carl Sagan that really spoke to me and that inspired this resource. He said this, I'm actually going to put it up on screen for you. He said, "How is it that hardly any major religion has looked at science and concluded, this is better than we thought? The universe is much bigger than our prophets said, grander, more subtle, more elegant. Instead, they say, no, my God is a little God and I want him to stay that way." A religion, old or new, that stressed the magnificence of the universe as revealed by modern science might be able to draw forth reserves of reverence and awe hardly tapped by the conventional faiths. That really inspired me, and so that is the foundation for this resource. See, Simon, the government in New Zealand are slowly moving away from policies geared towards caring for creation. Examples are deep sea mining and continuing to use coal as an energy resource. It's a deep concern. I'm really surprised to hear that from New Zealand. Wow, Simon, that is very disturbing. And of course, we know that in places like the USA, the fight against oil companies and corporations for mining, for oil drilling, it's an ongoing fight. A lot of the gains that have been made in terms of climate change were pushed back in the Trump administration, and there is a concern that that could happen again, looking at what's happening in the election in the US now. So we are seeing that happen, which just highlights again how important a season of creation like this is. So thanks so much for giving us that comment, Simon. That really is, it's a challenge. It's a call to action. And I appreciate you sharing that with us. So better than we thought. Carl Sagan challenges us as people of faith to look at the religion to look at the universe that science reveals to us and go, this is even better than we thought. And so with that in mind, my team and I, we've spent the last while creating a 6-week creation resource, which means it runs, if you run it on the recommended dates, it runs from the 1st of September, which is a Sunday this year, all the way through to the 6th of October. So technically the season of creation finishes on the 4th of October, which is the Feast of St. Francis. The 6th is just 2 days later, which is the Sunday. So I thought it would be nice just to add that in. So it gives us 6 weeks of celebrating creation, which just expands the season a little bit more, gives us a little bit more time to get our teeth into it. And this season of creation, liturgical and devotional guide, it includes both. So liturgical guide for leading worship and a devotional guide for personal devotion. It includes readings, scripture readings, one of which, by the way, is the Romans 8 reading. I don't think it's the exact same verses, but that same section from Romans 8, that's included in one of the weeks. There are sermon starters, so as usual, chapters that you can use to springboard your own preaching or can be used in the devotional resource as reflection chapters. There are prayers, liturgies, suggestions for decor, for creating an altar or a visual focus in your sanctuary, or a number of them. There are rituals and reflections for gathering at the start of a service, for responding after the message, for integrating and then sending people out into the rest of the week, taking the message with them. There's also a purpose-written table liturgy that will be part of it as well. We also have with this series a meditative video that is particularly designed for use in week 1, and the response ritual uses that. It's a short video, I think it runs at about 2 minutes, that just is an immersive experience of awe and wonder, looking at the universe and at our earth, with beautiful music and images that have been found on some sites that just make these things available through wonderful photographers and musicians who've done phenomenal work. You could technically use that every week of the series if you wanted to, but it's specifically geared for week 1. And for the devotional resource, of course, there are daily practices, reflections, chapters, and then daily questions to help with your own devotions as you work through the readings and the reflections as well. All of that's included in the liturgical and devotional guide, and I want to just take you through the chapters quickly. Obviously 6 weeks, 6 chapters. The first is called 2 Windows on the World. As we spend time meditating on creation and how it reveals God to us, we need science to join us in the journey, because without science, we miss so much that God seeks to offer. And so this is a chapter where we explore faith and science not as in conflict with each other, not as contradicting each other, but as partners, as two windows on the world that help us to understand and experience creation more deeply, and that both together enrich our faith as we engage with creation in that way. So a really exciting chapter, and it includes quotes from many scientists and theologians about how faith and science work together. Chapter 2, Falling in Love with Mystery. The invitation to be people of faith is an invitation into the wonderful, vibrant mystery of life at play in every corner of the universe. It is to the childlike wonder of curiosity, questioning, experimentation, and evolving knowledge. And it is an invitation to the deep and inescapable awareness of our kinship and belonging with the whole of creation. And so it's a chapter that challenges us not to try and boil everything down to understandable and manageable proportions, but to open ourselves to the mysteries of the cosmos, the mysteries of God, and to allow our embracing, our experiencing, our diving into mystery to enrich our lives, and how we really only experience creation effectively, and we only find our belonging and our kinship with creation, our shared life with creation, when we open ourselves to the mystery of creation. Wonderful, wonderful chapter that. Chapter 3, even if I say so myself, it was fun to write. It was wonderful for me to write. Chapter 3, Letting Creation Speak. I believe that science teaches us what I call the vocabulary of creation. And a lot of this is drawn from Michael Dowd. Some of you may know Michael Dowd, died a year or two ago, wonderful theologian. He called himself the evolutionary evangelist, wrote a wonderful book called Thank God for Evolution. And he was a pastor who spoke about evolution as the great story and drew people to experience God and life and everything we've been talking about as they explored evolution, not as a challenge to faith, but as a way to enrich our faith. And Michael Dowd speaks about three principles. Evidence is divine communication. He speaks about having a deep time view of the universe, and he speaks about our global connectedness, having a global perspective and a sense of our global interdependence. So when we allow science to teach us this vocabulary, as Michael Dowd teaches us, our experience of God, our world, other people, and even ourselves becomes so much richer, more nuanced, and more complex in a good way. And so that's what chapter 3 speaks about, is learning this vocabulary of the universe. Chapter 4 is about being at home in the earth. All lovers know that one of the most profoundly loving things that one person can do for another is to enter into their world, to learn how it works and what makes it sacred, and to share the wonder of the other person's experience of being. That's what love is. Learning to love the other person, to enter into their world, to love what they love, to learn how their world works and what's sacred in their world, and to begin to step into their shoes, is the old phrase, but to share their experience of being and the wonder of that. That's what love is. And the same is true with our relationship with the earth. If we truly love nature, we must enter into the world of nature on its own terms, and we must allow it to teach us its secrets. And chapter 4 invites us into that journey. Chapter 5 speaks about cosmic salvation. It's really about the fact that salvation is not just about human beings, not just about individuals escaping earth and going to a blissful life somewhere else for eternity. It's not, as Brian McLaren calls it, evacuation theology. Salvation from a biblical perspective is cosmic salvation. In Romans 8, All creation is waiting for the sons and daughters of God to be revealed so that it can experience the liberation. In Ephesians, God has called all creation to become one and whole in Christ. That is God's purpose. That is God's dream. So when we become participants in the priceless gift of this cosmic salvation, we become participants with Christ in bringing God's design to fulfillment. So it's not just that we're participants in experiencing cosmic salvation, we are participants in bringing cosmic salvation into being in our corner of the universe. We become, in the power of the Spirit, those who contribute in the small daily decisions and actions of our lives to moving the universe a little closer to becoming one and whole in Christ. That's what chapter 5 is about. And then chapter 6, which wraps up the journey, is one with the universe. It challenges us to recognize our unity with the universe. No matter what grief, despair, or destruction we may face, the trajectory of the universe and of our lives is always toward unity and wholeness. We see that in the evolution of the universe, that there's this growing evolution towards connection and wholeness and complexity. And so all that is required is for us to embrace the salvation with our whole selves and allow it to be the guiding energy of our lives and relationships. And when we do that, the time of creation's waiting for God's final liberation, if I can use that metaphor from Scripture, is reduced just that little bit more. In other words, we all and the whole of creation move that little bit closer to that oneness and wholeness that is God's dream for creation. And so that's also kind of exploring this cosmic salvation over chapter 5 and 6, but chapter 6 explores it in terms of this unity, this oneness, this wholeness. So those are the 6 chapters of Better Than We Thought, the new liturgical and devotional guide from Sacred Eyes. It'll be launching, as I say, next week. Of course, if you are a subscriber to any of the Sacred Eyes email lists or to Patreon or Substack, the Sacred Eyes pages there, you will automatically be receiving discount codes for these resources. They'll be priced much in the same range as our normal liturgical and devotional resources are. But of course, you'll get those discounts for those who are subscribers to any of my email lists. So look out for the emails that will be coming next week. Look out for the launch of that. And I'd be grateful if you would share the news of this Season of Creation guide, because that's one of the ways you can support Sacred Eyes. Even if you aren't able to get one of the resources for yourself, if you let others know about it and somebody else does, that helps to sustain this work and helps us to continue to produce these guides and these resources to help the churches around the world in their liturgical journeys. And that's my story. That's everything I wanted to share with you tonight. I really hope that's been helpful for you. We have a couple of minutes, so if there are any last questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, or if there are any comments. But I do really hope that you have found this a meaningful and inspiring, exciting webinar, and that it's really got you fired up for a season of creation. If not in September, then certainly sometime in the next few months before we get back to Advent. It's been lovely to share this time with you. I look forward to sharing the resource with you when it launches next week. So thanks so much for being here, and have a great week, everyone. Bye-bye.